Democracy is under attack, and the only ones who will protect us? Progressives. How do I know? They tell us incessantly. Welcome to the Jason Rantz Show, presented by None Better Tax Resolution. Gubernatorial hopeful Bob Ferguson told us again this week that democracy was under literal assault because two people with a shared name decided to legally run for governor for 3 days before ultimately pulling out. That's why Ferguson declared our very system of government and how we elect our leaders under literal assault.
But I want to be very clear. This is not an attack on me. It's an attack on our election system. It's an attack on our democracy. It's an attack on the people of the state of Washington to have a clear choice and to know who they're voting for. We have national threats to our elections. We have threats to our democracy. This is a threat to our election system.
Where would our democracy be if not for the selfless heroism of leaders like Bob Ferguson? I mean, the gall of paying the filing fee, using your legal name, and then filing to run for office by the deadline, that is indeed a literal assault on democracy. I mean, listen to the argument here about how dastardly this scheme actually was.
The Robert Ferguson from Yakima is the individual who voted in Republican primaries. The Robert Ferguson from Graham, Washington, on his wife's social media account, she refers to him as Robert Ferguson, not Bob Ferguson.
You got that? The two fake Bob Fergusons are actually named Robert. That proves they're using fake names in an effort to steal an election. Let's just hope no one checks out the filing documentation for the real Bob Ferguson, because his financial affairs disclosure form actually lists his name as, and wait for it, Robert Ferguson. I mean, it's not as official as having a Facebook page where someone calls you Robert, but it's something, right? But hey, I should not nitpick. As Ferguson's friend, former King County prosecuting attorney Dan Satterberg pointed out at a press conference this week, there's a law that prohibits the two other people with the exact same name as Bob Ferguson from running for office.
And subsection 4 here seems like it was written for today. It says a surname that is similar to one who has already filed for the same office and whose political reputation is widely known, with intent to confuse, clearly this is to confuse, and mislead the electors by capitalizing on the public reputation of the candidate who has previously filed, who has been the Attorney General for 12 years.
The law is clear. It says a, quote, surname similar to one who already filed for the same office. Similar, not identical. We're dealing with identical names, not similar names. Now, I know the left likes to redefine words. They do it all the time. Just ask them to define the word woman. But this brings up a second point, courtesy of a self-righteous comment that the real Slim Shady brought up as he was attacking gubernatorial opponent Dave Reichert, who didn't immediately condemn a stunt that he had nothing to do with.
A man who seems to care about enforcing the law. He talks a lot about it on the campaign trail. He seems to only care about enforcing the law in certain situations. He doesn't mind if someone's violating a criminal law if it benefits him politically.
I too can't stand people who refuse to enforce laws when it might benefit them politically. But it's kind of weird that Bob Ferguson would make that comment while standing next to Dan Satterberg, who in 2018 announced he would no longer enforce drug possession laws, resulting in thousands of drug overdose deaths. Weird that Bob Ferguson would take that position, given he and his party pushed to keep criminals out of jail despite breaking laws because of phony equity concerns. You could commit assaults, stalking, robbery, anything from this long list of other crimes, and not actually go to jail ever. Ferguson doesn't put out a comment about that. Speaking of which, Ferguson refuses to comment on the illegal occupation at the University of Washington by anti-Semites who are there to terrorize Jewish students. They've assaulted and stalked Jews and Zionists. They erected barriers to keep Jews and Zionists out of their encampment. And they've committed a whole lot of vandalism. And yet Ferguson refuses to condemn or directly discuss the issue, even when he was asked at the very press conference condemning Reichert for not speaking out about a stunt he had nothing to do with. So how odd is that? Now, of course, local media won't call him out for any of this, which is why he holds ridiculous press conferences where he says democracy is under assault, knowing he's going to be framed as some sort of hero on King 5 or in the Seattle Times. You can think the Bob Ferguson ballot stunt was unethical. I think that's fair, it's reasonable. But our democracy was never under threat, and Ferguson is no victim. He's just a desperate dweeb who has been running for governor for over a decade, exclusively taking political positions to help his inevitable run. And that has meant his own silence on important issues that he thinks could alienate radical progressives in Seattle while leaning into a failed strategy of claiming democracy is under assault. That line doesn't work anymore. But what is under assault? Our basic way of life. We have crime, homeless, drug, and economic crises in this state. And his policies, well, they've been the cause of them. Jason Rantz here with Greg Nunn, your local tax expert and advocate. Greg, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Jason, great to be with you again and talk about these tax issues.
So some folks out there have the IRS calling them nonstop or even coming to their door. What do you recommend they do?
You are protected by statute, by law, that when you have representation, they have to deal with your representative. And I am acting in your best interest when I'm dealing with the IRS. And I tell you, you don't want to talk to them, it'll just stress you out.
If you're having trouble with the IRS, then call Greg Nunn. Greg might be able to negotiate a settlement for up to 85% off the original amount owed, and that includes penalties and interest. Call Greg Nunn today. Did you like that commentary? Make sure you subscribe to the podcast of The Jason Rantz Show. Get it at KTTH.com or wherever it is you download your podcasts.